Hello, I am Aviva Lee, reporting live in Jerusalem from room 552 for Israel 24/6 TV. Today is a beautiful, bright, sunny 29th of July 2008 here in the eternal capital of the sovereign state of Israel, which also happens to be the holiest city on earth. Welcome to this edition of More Than Commentary. On Sunday of this week, Dr. Jonathan Spire came to Jerusalem and gave a press briefing to about 36 journalists who had gathered to hear his comments concerning the situation in Lebanon and the history of that country, which has plagued its modern development. Dr. Spire is a senior research fellow at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, Israel, and his comments were intended to be a preview for journalists who yesterday received other briefings while touring a few kilometers of the northern border of the sovereign state of Israel with Lebanon. We were greeted at Adir Mountain by retired Israel Defense Force Colonel Kobie Marom. Colonel Marom, a military expert, presented his own professional analysis of this long conflict. The colonel also discussed the repercussions concerning the strategic errors committed by both then Prime Ministers Aric Sharon and Ehud Barak in not delivering their promised heavy military response to Arab terrorism after Israel withdrew unilaterally from southern Lebanon and the Gaza Strip, respectively. Indeed, the information journalists received yesterday was not necessarily earth-shaking or new. However, it did give fresh credibility to Israel's posture toward the defeat of Arab terrorism on holy soil to those journalists who were covering the North for the first time. Indeed, the Israel Defense Force spokesperson, Captain Rubenstein, who accompanied us yesterday to Adir Mountain, Kibbutz Menara, and Metulla, gave a briefing following that of Colonel Marom about the IDF point of view, which sometimes did not entirely agree with that military analysis offered by the colonel. At Kibbutz Malchiya, the press heard comments of Mr. Eitan Aron, who said time and again, "I am not a military expert, I am a humble farmer here on this kibbutz, but I do know what happened here during the Second Lebanon War." And at Metulla, that city's mayor, Mr. Jacob Katz, offered first-hand information about the suffering endured by the citizens of the region during that same conflict. And while there were no surprises yesterday from those who experienced firsthand the Second Lebanon War, I must also say that there were no surprising questions asked by the press. While it was refreshing to see new faces among my colleagues yesterday, the old anti-Israel hacks were still present also. One such colleague, with a perpetual grimace, asked the Honorable Mayor Jacob Katz, "So, after all of this, do you feel any more peace of mind since the war concluded?" The mayor's erudite response was only 2 words: "Of course." You see, dear listener, the world has been lulled to sleep concerning the rules of engagement, the rules of warfare, the rules of victory, and the rules of defeat. There are those who hate the fact that the sovereign state of Israel exists, and they wage war on Israel via rockets and mortar shells. And there are those in the media who wage war on Israel, our freedom and our democracy, by purporting to be the champions of peace and human rights. In fact, those members of the media who existentially hold the hands of the enemies of the sovereign state of Israel, and some of them were present at all of yesterday's press briefings, enjoying the same safety delivered to that few kilometers of border by the same Israeli military, they obviously hold in such contempt. And among those colleagues with whom I ate last evening, I was privileged to make a new acquaintance. This acquaintance produces documentaries about the regional conflict here. That colleague was very quick to tell me, and I quote, "We cover both sides of the story." However, when I asked that same individual, who is on the payroll of a European company, if the crew had ever done a documentary about the Arabs who enlisted in Hitler's army to join him in his express purpose of helping that dictator accomplish the final solution, my new acquaintance looked surprised. Believe me, dear listener, that history is part and parcel of the Arab aggression we Jews were victorious over when the contemporary sovereign state of Israel was first recognized by the United Nations some 60 years ago. And that same history is also part and parcel of the present here in the sovereign state of Israel. The truth is, Arabs in the region who hate the fact that Jews are here living in a country we gratefully call our own, far and away outnumber the Arabs here in the region who are ready and willing to acknowledge the sovereign state of Israel and our place in the community of nations, much less our place on this tiny, tiny strip of holy soil. I would remind all of my colleagues of one journalist, though there are many, who also sympathized with so-called freedom fighters in their battle with so-called oppression and intervention of the West. Daniel Pearl. Was it Jews who conspired to kidnap and kill Daniel Pearl? Was it Jews who hated Daniel Pearl in spite of his outspoken sympathies for them and his attempt to cover both sides of the story? Was it Jews who filmed the last breath drawn by Daniel Pearl and then chanted an Arabic Islamic mantra? The answer, dear listener, to all of those questions is the same resounding no. Still and yet, of all of the hours of comment and first-hand information which the press listened to yesterday, the most compelling remark was made by the man who proudly said, "I am just a humble farmer." That man who had lived with the incoming Russian-made Katyushas fired just kilometers from his beloved Kibbutz, looked to the press and said, and I quote, "I have learned one thing living here next to this border. Trust God, trust in your own strength, trust no one else." End quote. I approached that farmer after he concluded his remarks there in a no-frills dining room where he had undoubtedly eaten many, many meals at both the beginning and end of many, many honest, hard days' back-breaking work in the surrounding fields. I thanked him for his comments and his statements. He looked into my eyes and whispered, "And it is in that order also. Trust God first and always." There is little else to be said about yesterday's briefing after standing in that kibbutz dining room with that farmer. I wish the entire listening world had been there to hear what he had to say. Thank you to Media Central for the impromptu use of their office to facilitate the recording of this show. And that concludes this edition of More Than Commentary. I am Aviva Lee, reporting live in Jerusalem from room 552 for Israel 24/6 TV. Thank you and Shalom.